In the time when winter's breath could freeze the very soul, and legends walked among mortals like shadows cast by dying fires, there came to pass a tale that would echo through the ages. Across the endless expanse of snow-laden field, where the winds sang lamentations, and the earth lay buried beneath winter's white shroud, stood a figure cloaked in righteous purpose. This was no ordinary man, but one touched by divine grace, a saint whose heart burned with holy fire, even as frost gathered upon his brow. For 7 long years he had pursued his quarry, following whispers carried on bitter winds and signs written in the language of ravens. His vow, sworn before altar and heaven alike, rang clear as temple bells. The witch must die. Her dark arts had sown too much sorrow. Her forbidden knowledge claimed too many innocent souls. Now, at last, his pilgrimage of vengeance had led him here, to this desolate place, where the very air seemed to thrum with ancient power. The witch was near. He could feel her presence like a splinter in his sanctified soul. But in his righteous fury, did the saint comprehend the true nature of the forces he sought to challenge? Did he understand that some hunts transform the hunter, and that in the deepest winter, even the purest light can cast the darkest shadows? For in this tale, dear listener, the greatest mystery is not the witch's power, nor the saint's resolve, but which of these two souls shall prove to be the true protagonist when the final snows melt away. In the age when gods walked closer to the earth, and their wrath shook the pillars of heaven, there came tidings that would make even the immortals tremble. Word reached the enchantress Circe upon her island sanctuary, carried by storm winds and the cries of dying mortals. Gugalana, the bull of heaven, had broken free from divine chains, and now thundered across the world with hooves like falling mountains. Where he stepped, cities crumbled to dust. Where he breathed, the very air turned to poison. Through sheets of rain and curtains of lightning, Circe witnessed the devastation from afar. She saw proud kingdoms become graveyards, saw heroes flee like startled children before the beast's terrible might. Her heart, long hardened by centuries of solitude, cracked like ice in spring at the sight of such suffering. The sorceress knew bitter truth. Her arts, mighty as they were, could not bind what the gods themselves had forged. No spell could turn divine fury into harmless swine. No potion could make celestial bronze as fragile as mortal flesh. Yet as she watched the world burn beneath Gugalana's rage, Circe understood that wisdom and power meant nothing if courage failed. Thus began the tale of how one who had spent eternity turning others into beasts would face the greatest beast of all. Not with magic, but with something far more dangerous, the fierce resolve of a heart that chooses to care.
Circe's not one to just sit inside. She's got a plan. とはいえ、私も女ですので。
In the space between worlds, where reality frays like ancient tapestry and even gods fear to tread, there exists a prison made of endless white. Circe found herself cast into this void without warning or memory of passage, her feet touching nothing, yet somehow standing firm upon the threshold of existence itself. Here, at the very edge of creation, the familiar laws of magic held no sway, and even her immortal senses reeled at the alien emptiness. But the void was not uninhabited. From the white expanse rose a shape born of purest malice, a creature of writhing black mud that pulsed with the concentrated hatred of ages. This was no natural beast, but something spawned from abandonment and rage, cast aside by a demon king whose ambitions had once threatened to devour the world entire. Now it dwelt in this colorless prison, striking at any soul foolish enough to breach its domain. Circe's mind raced, even as the thing began to move toward her with predatory hunger. Someone had crafted this trap, woven this white cage to contain what could not be destroyed. But there was no time for such mysteries, only the stark choice between battle and oblivion. Thus, the sorceress, who had faced gods and monsters alike, prepared to confront something far worse, the living embodiment of a tyrant's discarded cruelty, abandoned but never truly dead.
Prepare to meet your sticky doom. He boomed, spelling all the gloom. Then beams of light from slimy sockets. I touch and weave a clumsy dance. This money mess, second chance. My circuits work, my mind is raised. A sticky problem in this place. But mad experiments you see have made me quite resilient. So I just laughed, a bubbling sound, and stomped my foot upon the ground. A ripple spread, a sonic wave. The mud recoiled, began to cave. He's choked, a gurgling plea. My structure fails, so is me. He lost his form, a muddy smear. His laser eyes now filled with fear. He melted back to whence he came. Unfurled in my growing fame. This demon's folly, so absurd. A lesson learned, a whispered word. From sticky sludge to victory bright. A strange new path baked in the light. Each challenge faced, a skill refined. Leaving the darkness far behind. And so I laughed, a bubbling sound, and stomped my foot upon the ground. A ripple spread, a sonic wave. The mud recoil began to cave. He sputtered, choked, a gurgling plea. My structure fails, so woe is me.
In the time after great battles, when even legends grow weary of their own glory, there comes a moment when the mightiest heroes crave nothing more than blessed anonymity. The sorceress Circe had fought gods and monsters, had saved worlds and toppled kingdoms. Her name was whispered in reverence across 1,000 realms, yet her immortal heart yearned for something no epic could provide. A simple vacation. Thus, she descended from her island sanctuary to the neon-lit desert oasis called Las Vegas, seeking only dice to roll and drinks to savor. But fate, that most persistent of storytellers, had other plans. In trying to blend among mortals, Circe's very presence drew eyes like moths to flame. Without meaning to, she outshone the great artist Hokusai, whose brush had once captured the fury of waves and the grace of mountains. The master found himself eclipsed by a tourist who transformed cocktail napkins into butterflies with idle gestures. What began as innocent rivalry soon awakened something ancient beneath the casino lights. The mysterious god Medjed emerged from shadows between slot machines, wrapped in bandages and wielding powers that made the desert itself tremble. Yet, when the dust settled and the masks fell away, Circe would discover that her greatest opponent wore a face she had not expected. For in this tale of vacation turned adventure, the sorceress would learn that even in the land of illusion, the most dangerous enemies are those who know exactly who you really are.
Ready to conquer, nowhere to hide. The air was thick with a whispered name, a shadow dancing, fanning the flame. Hakusai's art, a vibrant hue, but Circe's charm.
そして命の価値に区別なく
Vegas nights, a wicked delight. Circe's in town, shining so bright. She stole the show with a flick of her wrist, leaving Hokusai in a smoky mist. Medjed appeared with a fearsome stare, a challenge issued beyond compare. This Egyptian god with the fences so grand sealed in shadow. Across the land, cliffs and curses, a formidable wall. Circe pressed on, standing tall. She dodged the jinx, she broke the hex. This ancient power, she would vex. The crowd held its breath, the tension grew. What ancient magic would see her through? The energy pulsed, a strange design, a flicker of doubt, a subtle sign. The veil within, the mystery frayed. What secrets in this darkness play? Vegas nights, awakened Circe's in town, shining so bright. She stole the show with a flick of her wrist, leaving Hokusai in a smoky mist. Medjed appeared with a fearsome stare, a challenge issued beyond compare. No ancient god, just me poker standing.
女神ヘカテよ、感謝いたします。
In the deepest hour of night, when even immortals surrender to slumber's embrace, the boundaries between worlds grow thin as spider's silk. Sleep had always been Circe's sanctuary, the one realm where ancient sorceresses could rest without schemes or sorcery. But on this night, something vast and alien pressed against the walls of her dreaming mind. The familiar comfort of her island visions twisted into impossible geometries, where up became down and logic became madness. Through corridors that breathed like living things and staircases that led to their own beginnings, Circe wandered in growing unease. The dreamscape pulsed with eldritch wrongness, colors that had no names, sounds that spoke in languages older than Earth itself. Each step forward brought new horrors. Mirrors that showed not reflections but accusations. Doors that opened onto the void between stars. At the heart of this nightmare maze waited a figure both familiar and strange. A young woman whose smile held the weight of cosmic knowledge. Abigail Williams, Witch of Salem, now herald of something far greater and more terrible than any earthly power. As their battle shook the foundations of the dream realm, reality began to blur and fade. But in the moment before awakening, as Abigail's form dissolved like morning mist, her final words carried a truth that would haunt Circe's waking hours. All the sorceress's trials, all her battles and sorrows, had been orchestrated by a divine hand that watched from beyond the heavens. So did Circe awaken to find that her greatest enemy had never been the beast she fought, but the unseen puppeteer who had been pulling the strings of her fate from the very beginning.
お客様、獲物はあちらでございますね。理解した。完全放棄。よって、その分はい、NHS サービスです。もちろんお望みのものです。
In the hour when truth becomes burden, and knowledge transforms into curse, even the wisest among immortals must choose between safety and justice. The revelation haunted Circe's every waking moment. All her trials, all her pain, had been the cruel games of Caren, a love god whose divine madness had turned affection into torment. This celestial infant, born from the void between stars, wielded powers that could reshape reality with a giggle, unmake worlds with a tantrum. The sorceress had faced titans and demons, but never had she confronted something so alien, so unpredictably dangerous. To reach this cosmic puppeteer, Circe would have to abandon the mortal realm entirely, ascending beyond the boundaries of earth and sky, into the divine spheres where her magic might prove as useless as whispers against hurricane winds. Even if her millennia of experience could somehow triumph over godhood itself, would the path home remain open? Or would victory mean eternal exile among the stars? Doubt gnawed at her immortal heart like poison. Every logical voice within her counseled retreat, urged her to accept this cosmic injustice rather than risk everything on a battle she might not survive. Yet, as she stood upon her island sanctuary, watching the waves that had witnessed countless ages, Circe felt the weight of choice settle upon her shoulders. For in this moment, the sorceress understood that some battles must be fought, not because victory is certain, but because the alternative, living forever as a pawn in another's game, is a fate far worse than any death.
ここに豚の世を立てよ
Shimmering haze, confused
はいえ、私も女ですので。
In the twilight of great cycles, when the mightiest journeys near their end, fate often saves its cruelest tests for the final step toward home. From the celestial heights Circe fell, triumphant yet broken, her victory over the mad love god Caren carved into her very soul. The divine fires that had burned within her during that cosmic battle now flickered like dying embers, leaving her weakened as she descended toward the mortal realm she had missed so desperately. But the ocean depths held one last enemy, Dagon, the defiled god whose divine form had been twisted into something monstrous and envious. This wretched creature of scale and slime had watched her celestial battle from his watery domain, coveting the power that could humble gods themselves. In her moment of exhaustion, as she plummeted toward the waves, the fish fiend struck. Into his storm-lashed kingdom he dragged her, through currents thick with malice and trenches that whispered ancient curses. His domain pulsed with corrupted magic, every trap and snare designed to steal what she had earned through blood and sacrifice. Yet in his bitter envy, Dagon had forgotten the fundamental truth that had carried Circe through millennia of trials. For this was not merely another battle, but the final verse of an epic song, and the sorceress who had learned to turn gods into swine, who had faced the void between stars and returned victorious, would not be denied her homecoming by a creature whose only power was the corruption of what others had built. Thus would end the cycle, with Circe's return to her island sanctuary, her trials complete, her legend finally her own.
Oh, Dagon, you foolish, disgusting sea beast. Your jealousy sour, your breath is a feast. A barnacle's bride and utter despair. You think you can stop me, don't make me laugh. Stand my spells are my own, they won't be denied. I'll break your foul curse with a flick of my stride. Your strength will now wane, you'll be weak as can be. But I've got a potion, a personal blend, a quick little sip, and your magic I'll bend. The glue washes off, the enchantment undone. This fish-faced disgrace thinks he's already won. He's thrashing and writhing, a ridiculous show. You can't stop my progress, you overgrown glow. Surges again with a desperate roar, trying to trap me forevermore. But this ain't my first rodeo. Oh no, dear Dagon, my resilience is stronger, and you're soon to be gone. Oh Dagon, you foolish, disgusting sea beast. Your jealousy sour, your breath is a feast. A barnacle's bride and utter despair. You think you can stop me, don't make me laugh. Stare, my spells are my own, they won't be denied. I'll break your foul curse with a flick of my stride. From heavens above to depths down below, I've learned and I've grown, my power does flow. No creature of darkness, no god of the deep can steal what I've earned, the promises I keep. He's fighting for chance, but I stand tall and proud.
仕事とはいえ、私も女ですので、実利、成績、そして趣味を優先で楽しませていただきましたわ。